Ooh.
Right. Okay, starting. So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Natural Sciences Lecture Series with the Friends of San Pedro Valley Park. I'm Mila Stroganoff, Programs Director and host for this evening's webinar. I hope everyone is well and looking forward to tonight's program. Dr. Tom Parker, I'm delighted to say, is joining us and will discuss Chaparral in San Mateo County and San Diego County, as well as montane chaparral that is found above the snow line in California mountains. I will introduce Dr. Parker in just a moment. First, let me mention that January's program with Tanya Baxter has been recorded and may be accessed on our website. She discussed the flora of the Northern Sierra. We also have a wide selection of lectures that are recorded on the Friends website. So do take a moment or two to have a look. The website is friendsofsanpedrovalleypark.org. And second, let me give all of you a heads up regarding the upcoming lecture. We have two speakers discussing Bay Area coyotes. Encounters are becoming more frequent between humans and coyotes, as well as pets and coyotes, both in cities and beyond city limits. So it seems only right to find out as much as we can about coyotes and what adjustments need to be made in order to coexist. Join me on Saturday, March 8th at 7 p.m. and listen to two brilliant young people introducing us to their latest scientific research into coyotes. And tonight's lecture will follow the same pattern as previous ones with a Q&A at the end. Please write questions and comments into the Q&A section because, as you well know, our chat is sort of a disabled one, doesn't quite function as well as it should. So please write everything into the Q&A, into the question Q&A section. And now to our speaker. Oh, and I must say, just a minute, folks. This lecture is being recorded and will be posted. So, but do stay with us. Come up with good questions at the end, and Dr. Parker will answer them. So I'm very pleased indeed that Dr. Tom Parker has agreed to present tonight. Allow me to introduce him. Tom Parker is Professor of Biology Emeritus at San Francisco State University, currently the Editor-in-Chief of Madroño, the Western America Journal of Botany, a publication of the California Botanical Society. Dr. Parker is an evolutionary ecologist focused on the role of plants in ecological communities. He specializes in the dynamics of plant communities and has conducted research principally on tidal wetlands and chaparral. So Tom, please take it away.
Is it working? Okay.
Yes, yes, it is.
All right. We're going to talk about California chaparral tonight, and it's one of my favorite vegetation types. It's beautiful. It's highly diverse. It's very Californian, and a lot of people would like it to disappear. So let's find out. And because it's a Zoom, I thought you might want to see what I look like. And one of my favorite plants is behind me. That happens to be Arctostaphylos pringlei, subspecies Drupacia, but just an Arctostaphylos is good enough. So let's think about chaparral. This is quintessentially Californian in terms of a vegetation type. It's about 9 to 10% of native vegetation. And if you exclude the desert, that percentage jumps up quite a lot. It's about almost a quarter of our native plant species are found in chaparral. And a large proportion of those species are endemic. And that just means they're only found in California. Another reason it's a very quintessential Californian vegetation. And of those endemics, most of them are rare and endangered and are either state or federally listed species. So this is quite a powerful vegetation to become familiar with. It's also, because it's very Californian. It's adapted to major processes that you see in the state, like our climate, which is filled with summer droughts, and the fire that's a consequence of those summer droughts. Lots of different species that I just want you to appreciate. We're just going to run through some of them. This isn't trying to be a terribly didactic lecture, so it's more, let's see what we've got. So here's the distribution of chaparral in California. The blue color is lower elevation chaparral that you're probably familiar with, and the red is montane chaparral above the winter snow line. Very diverse, as you can see, throughout the state. And you can almost see it showing you where all the mountains are in the state. And it occurs along the coast in central and southern California. But in Northern California, the coast is occupied mostly by forest. So the two things to keep in mind that have dominated chaparral, and that's ecological filtering, which is just a process whereby a particular kind of event, it can be just one event, completely eliminates one or more species while others remain because they could tolerate that event. And then there's another thing called ecological adaptation, and that's really more of a long-term evolutionary process. And that's where there is a repeated and predictable process or event that acts on a population that favors certain traits or combinations of traits across generations. And you end up calling those things adaptations. But we'll see that over and over again in the different groups in the chaparral that we're going to take a look at. So if you think about ecological filtering, the two major processes that dominate most of chaparral are the annual drought, and it just varies in intensity from one year to another, and it varies in intensity from north to south. We also have fire as a very major process, and it's always a canopy fire because these plants are short and you can't run a fire underneath their canopies. Fires are infrequent, but they are dramatic and they are intense. And that is a very strong impact on the vegetation that's there. There's also ecological adaptation, and drought is one of those severe stresses that are on plants in this area. Some of them just go dormant. Some of them don't really notice the drought because they have extremely deep roots. For those plants, it's just tough to get a seedling established because seedlings don't have deep roots. Some have modified their vascular system so that they can tolerate water stress. And they usually have much shallower root systems. And almost all of them have modified leaves to be thick so that they can reduce water loss. And that causes them to be slower in growth. And that means they're not as competitive with faster growing things. So there's a cost benefit to that. They adapt to fire in different ways. Most of them resprout, but not all of them. And that just means the tops may burn, but the plants just recover right afterwards. A lot of the species that you find in chaparral produce dormant seed, and that seed is released from dormancy by fire. And that's why fire is actually a critical part of chaparral. And if you suppress fire or get rid of it, that's a disturbance and you'll start losing chaparral. Some of the plants with those dormant seed are actually killed by fire. They're the few that are killed, and they completely depend upon the seed bank to recover their populations. And a lot of the diversity that chaparral has is hidden from you, and you only see it in the first year or two after a fire. And they live in chaparral as just seed in the soil, and you only see them in those first couple of post-fire years. So that's really the way it works. We're going to speak a little bit about montane chaparral, a little bit about interior chaparral. Those are sites away from the coast that are hot and dry. The coastal mountains are also dry, but they heavily influenced by being close to the ocean. A lot of chaparral dominates coastal dunes in our state. And one thing that's important for those coastal areas that creates a gradient from the ocean inland is coastal fog. And if you're close to the coast, you have a cloud cover during the dry season that's stressful. It keeps the temperatures cool. And if you happen to also be at the right elevation, you get a lot of fog drip that supplements any precipitation that you may or may not have gotten. One thing to think about for coastal fog, though, to keep in mind is that if you're really close to the ocean, your rainfall is pretty low. So it's just the cloud cover that's protecting you from the stresses that you would get if you were in a hotter, drier place. So it's quintessentially Californian, obviously, but there's a lot of people who live in this state. And because it experiences annual drought, and drought sometimes leads to fire if somebody ignites it. And Chaparral is adapted to both drought and fire, but it comes back really fast. In a couple of years, you wouldn't think that place had just burned. And if you were to walk around post-fire, you found a lot of annuals in the first year or two. They're absolutely beautiful. Some of these you would only find, or most of them you only find in chaparral areas after a fire. Things like this one, Eminanthe penduliflora. I think it's called windflower. I'm not really good with common names. That's why I usually write them down. Phacelia grandiflora. The first time I saw this plant, by the way, the plant was over 6 feet tall. So these annuals can really take off in a post-fire place. A lot of herbaceous perennials are hidden during the time when there's no fires, and they pop up and become glorious during that post-fire time. Toxicoscordion, Toxicoscordion on the left used to be called Zygodinus. Death camas is another common name for it. And then Calochortus or Mariposa lilies on the right, a high diversity of those species you'd find post-fire. Now, the trouble for chaparral is not that it's adapted to drought and that fires occur, but that urban areas have encroached, and humans have a particular way of looking at things. And human areas are not well adapted. So we're not going to really talk about this too much, especially with all the fires that have taken out friends of mine in the Los Angeles area, their homes at least. But you're obviously aware of this. And as a consequence, when you look at chaparral, there tends to be a love-hate relationship, or at least if you're a botanist, you have the love side. And if you're not a botanist, maybe you only have the hate side. But this is a gorgeous vegetation that is very adapted to our particular kinds of circumstances. So I'm just going to emphasize the love part of that relationship today and hope to drag you along with it. So let's talk about montane chaparral. That's the red part that's at high elevation. It's basically above winter snow line, and that becomes the unique stress. It's extremely cold, freezing temperatures before the snow, the heavy snowpack. And as a consequence, you end up with fewer shrub species because there's no summer rainfall in our montane chaparral. If you're in the Rocky Mountains, you get a lot of rain in the summer, and that is a compensating factor, but we don't get that rain. And we just have snow as the source of moisture in the soil. It is, however, a gorgeous and lovely vegetation type if you hike around. You're looking at montane chaparral right here, but it's under the snow. So you can see what kind of a problem there might be, but the plants can tolerate it. This is greenleaf manzanita. Unlike the coastal versions of manzanitas, the stems on this plant are relatively flexible, and that's probably a selection due to the snow weight that would be breaking them otherwise. Here's what it looks like in summer. It's a lovely plant. I'm a little biased toward manzanitas because I do research on them. You might know that already, but you'll hear a lot about manzanitas tonight. Another montane manzanita is the pine mat. That's the one that's laying down close to the ground. It's prostrate to slightly mounding. It is extensive in some areas as long as the canopy of the trees are sufficiently open. This plant will form a closed canopy understory. Really lovely. I don't know what you think about it, but I have so many pictures of sites like this because every time I see it, it just sort of takes my breath away. A lot of different plants that you would find in this montane chaparral. This is a deciduous ceanothus deer brush, Ceanothus integeramus. This is actually extremely widespread in Western United States, but it's very common in our high elevation chaparral. Ceanothus velutinus, tobacco brush, mostly on the east slope of the Sierra, but it drops over and gets a little more abundant on the ocean facing sides as you go farther north. It's called tobacco brush because of the smell if you were to rub the leaves. Another nice white flowered ceanothus. Oops. Ceanothus cordialatus is a very common plant up there. It's generally smaller or at least shorter. It's called snowbush. Lovely white flowers and whitish stems. It does have another common name. And if you were to try to walk through it, the other common name is mountain whitethorn. And that is because it has prominent thorns at the ends of all the stems. A undistinguished looking ceanothus is Ceanothus arcuatus. It is nonetheless has lovely flowers, but it's kind of a short plant and it dominates after fires, but you won't see it unless you go to a post-fire area. Another genus that's common in chaparral are the oaks. Quercus vaccinifolia is the huckleberry oak, and that is the only oak that you would find above the snow line. This is unusual for two reasons. One is that the huckleberry oak is only one of two species in a lineage of oaks called the golden cup oaks, and the other one is the interior or the canyon live oak. The other thing that's really cool about this shrub is if you look at the catkins, the male flowers, the inflorescence for male flowers, in this oak, instead of hanging down like they do in all the other oaks, they are erect. You can kind of see on the leaves there, those are the catkins that are erect on this plant during the time of flowering. Very unusual. Here's a post-fire area where the fire canopied and killed a lot of the trees. The conifers do have a few individuals here and there that have stayed alive, and they'll be reestablishing the forest through time. But meanwhile, the chaparral has taken over the site. The ceanothus species that you see are nitrogen fixing. So their cover and the fact that they're fixing nitrogen in their roots means that the site is going to be a nice fertile place for the trees as they get established. The Arctostaphylos that you see on the left side has mutualists that conifers require to get established in the soil. They're mycorrhizal fungi. And so all of these plants inadvertently are facilitating the recovery of the forest. The forest trees, the seedlings in the first year or two need a little bit of shade in order for the seedlings to get established. And these are the plants that are going to provide that. Really kind of a cool area to go through a fire. A lot of people view fire sites as kind of tragic. I always see them as a baby forest is starting and the shrubs are looking happy. If you drop to lower elevation, you get a very different kind of chaparral, at least lower elevation in the Sierra. Mostly Ceanothus cuneatus, buckbrush. That is a very widespread species, a lot of variation in the way it looks in terms of leaf shape, but that's okay. We'll see it everywhere. The common manzanita at low elevation is the white-leaf manzanita, Arctostaphylos viscida. If you look at the inflorescence in the middle of the screen there, you can see how shiny it is. The inflorescence is covered with glands that are prostrate onto the bracts and are very sticky. So if you were to press your fingers against them, it would stick to you. I don't know why. It's probably anti-insect. If you look, you can see a lot of small insects stuck to those inflorescences. Let's move over to the coastal ranges and look at lower elevation chaparral. Now we have a really diverse shrub species composition from north to south, really diverse post-fire annual response that I showed you earlier. And it's very drought and fire adapted. But there is a strong climatic gradient, which is part of the reason for that high diversity of shrubs and annuals in that whole system. And that gradient goes from the northwest to the southeast. And just to give you a flavor, here's some temperature profiles. Marin County, these are average temperatures by month. So they're not the extremes or the average that you would find for the high and low. But you can see that Marin is much cooler than Monterey, which isn't that far away. San Luis Obispo and Los Angeles are much hotter in the summer. And that is actually one of the ecological filters, that higher temperatures that are experienced in the summer. If you look at precipitation, that's the lower graphs. Marin County has almost twice as much precipitation as most of those central and southern counties. Monterey County, again, not that far away, but only 2/3 the amount of rainfall that Marin County gets. Los Angeles and San Luis Obispo are pretty low. Notice nobody has any rain in this middle of summer, and those are long-term averages. I don't know, I've lived in San Diego County for 4 or 5 years. We've had 2 hurricanes in the summer, so who knows? Climate change may be modifying this pretty fast. There are some widespread species, not a lot of them, but let's take a look at them. You're probably familiar with them if you've ever walked through Chaparral. This one is called chamise, Adenostoma fasciculatum. It's in the rose family, really small needle-like leaves. My first graduate student told me this plant, the common name was tick bush, because that's her experience walking through chamise, but I don't know. I've never gotten ticks off this plant. It blooms at the beginning of summer. It's in the rose family. I don't know, do those look like rose flowers to you? They're very small, but if you look at the characters, it's definitely a beautiful rose. Another widespread species is Arctostaphylos glandulosa, Eastwood's manzanita. Now this one has a lot of subspecies, but it basically grows from near the Oregon border into the northern part of Baja California. So it is extremely widespread in one subspecies or another. And glandulosa is all the way in that distribution. Here's one of the smaller subspecies, Mollis, which occurs in the Santa Ynez Mountains and in Ventura County as well. Another really widespread one was that buckbrush we talked about earlier. It wraps around the Central Valley and also occurs in the coast ranges, the outer coast ranges as well. Very widespread. On the other hand, Ceanothus is a very diverse group, but this is the one species that seems to have figured out California completely. One of the oaks is extremely widespread, the inland scrub oak, Quercus berberidifolia. A lot of variation in the leaf shape. Throw a drought in and you get even stranger shapes. And one widespread species that's never dominant or abundant anywhere, but you probably are familiar with it because of the fruit when it fruits in the fall and matures around December. And that's toyon, Heteromeles arbutifolia. So these widespread species are probably widespread because they are adapted to drought and fire, like all the chaparral species. But in terms of these particular ones, the oaks are very deep-rooted. Arctostaphylos glandulosa is deep-rooted, not all the manzanitas are. And toyon is very deep-rooted. So those plants hardly experience the dry season. The others, most of the other manzanitas that we'll see later and the Ceanothus cuneatus you looked at have a modified vascular system that can tolerate water stress and keep the leaves hydrated. And that's a really different kind of way of dealing with it. And they have relatively shallow roots. All of them, though, are adapted to fire, and except for the toyon and the oak, the other three genera have dormant fire release seed, and they all depend upon fire to reproduce post flower to get new seedlings. Now, of those widespread genera, most of them have localized species that are pretty restricted. So chamise is everywhere. But the other three genera have a lot of other species that you might find in one place or another. For example, in the Bay Area, here are two other oaks that you would also find. If you were on Mount Tam and parts of the Santa Cruz Mountains, Quercus wislizenii frutescens, the shrub variety of the interior live oak, is a really common oak. If you're on Serpentine, you would find Quercus dorata, the leather oak. If you wander around in the Bay Area, you'll find a lot of different Ceanothus species. Ceanothus is one of the most diverse woody genera in California. Lots of different species that really differ in the range, the extent of ranges. Two short trees are also part of chaparral, or at least the edges of chaparral, cypresses and closed-cone pines. What's characteristic of these plants is that they produce cones, but the cones don't open until there's a fire. So they have essentially dormant seed, but the seed is dormant because they've been suppressed by the cones. The fire kills off or burns off a glaze that keeps the cones sealed. And as the fire recedes away, the cones begin to open and release the seed. And that's how they regenerate. Now, Arctostaphylos, my favorite genus, is the most diverse genus in the state, and that's a woody genus. A lot of widespread species, but mostly narrowly distributed species. So let's take a look at some of these localized species. That blue area of California that I've highlighted is the Central Coast from the Bay Area to Santa Barbara County. These are the plants that you would find that are just Arctostaphylos species in those areas. That's 52. That's half or a little more than half of all the manzanitas in globally. So that's diversity. Most of these are narrow soil endemics. In other words, they're highly restricted to limited areas. So for example, the column on the left, if you look at the last species, Arctostaphylos nipumu, that is the most recently named species. You would only find it in the town of Nipomo. That's in the Nipomo Mesa, and the town has unfortunately grown up in an area filled with endemic species. All of these are really narrowly distributed. Different kinds of soils because the coast ranges have diverse tectonics that have pulled up granites, serpentines, and sandstones, shales, and lots of other variations. Montana on the left, only found in Marin County, Gabilanensis on granite outcrops, only found in the Gabilan Range. Glutinosa, the Schreiber's manzanita, only found in Santa Cruz County in a very small area of Monterey Shale. In fact, almost every individual except for a handful are within the Lockheed Martin research area. You have to get a permit to go visit these plants. Santa Cruz Sandhills have Arctostaphylos sylvicola with lost pines, Pinus ponderosa. Those are only found in those limited parts of the Santa Cruz Mountains. So lots of examples of that you would find in other locations. Same list of species, only this time these are plants that are restricted due to their climates. They require cooler climates. They need to be in the fog, and they need to have those colder temperatures. So you can see that's a huge proportion of the diversity of just this one genus along the coast. The same thing is occurring for Ceanothus and other genera that you would find. That coastal marine layer is very critical for those plants, and it's associated with that high manzanita and ceanothus diversity. Here's some examples. We've looked at this before, but we're going to take a closer look at um, some of the ones that are narrowly distributed. The lower right-hand corner with Ceanothus cuneatus, that is a widespread species, but it's also on the coast, but the others are very narrow. In the left side, Ceanothus gloriosus variety exultatus is called the glory bush. It has some different sub varieties. If you're at Point Reyes, it's variety gloriosus, and that's a prostrate ceanothus that you would find if you walk around. But on Bolinas Ridge, you find gloriosus exultatus as a tall ceanothus. And it's pretty abundant in Bolinas Ridge, but patchily it'll go from Marin County north to Mendocino County. That's the only places you find it. It's really close to the coast. Uh, on the right-hand side is Ceanothus masonii, also found on Bolinas Ridge, but really restricted to an area that's less than 40 or 50 meters in length along the ridge. It's thought to be maybe of hybrid origin between perhaps gloriosus and another Ceanothus on that ridge, Ceanothus ramulosus, but no one has confirmed that with genetics, and it has a lot of distinctions and other characters. A serpentine endemic in Marin is Ceanothus jepsonii. I really like this one because it's purple flowered, very dark purple, only on serpentine. It has those very thick, sharp, holly-like leaves. There's another subspecies or variety of this species that you would find in Napa and Lake and part of Sonoma County called Ceanothus jepsonii variety albiflorus, and it has white flowers, but that's why I really like the Marin County purple flowered one. They're really beautiful. A really unusual characteristic about this particular species, though, both the white and the purple flowered one, is that they are sixmerous. They have six petals. All of this genus, and in fact, all of the family that this genus is in, the Rhamnaceae, oh boy, that's hard tonight, is five petaled, and this one has six. And I'll count for you one of them so that you can see. If you look around enough, you'll find a seven or eight flowered one occasionally. They're mostly usually six flowered. Very unusual. Also in Marin County, also on serpentine, also with holly-like leaves, is a localized endemic Ceanothus decornutus, the Nicosia ceanothus. This is only found in little shrubby outcrops above the Nicosia Reservoir. If you walk on that ridge over to the edge, you can look down to Point Reyes Station. It's really patchy, but only in a very small area, and these serpentines. What I like about it is it was lumped into Jepsonii for a long time, and here we have close-ups of the fruit of both of those species. And if you look at the fruit of Jepsonii, those prolonged pieces from the top of the fruit are called horns. And over here, there are no horns on the other Ceanothus decornutus. And if you're good with Latin, you already can translate that name because decornutus means dehorned. So the Ceanothus decornutus, the common name, I guess, should be dehorned Ceanothus, but no, it's not. If you start moving south from Marin County into San Mateo County and farther south in the Central Coast, one of the prominent ceanothus you find is papilosus. And if you look at the leaves, you can see they have little bumps on it like pustules, and they have little glandular hairs or that come out of those pustules, and very unusual kind of leaf. But it is a lovely blue-flowered plant. And if you look at the fruit, you can see they are smooth, no horns here at all, very small, and rapidly reestablishes itself post-fire in a stand. As you get to San Luis Obispo County and farther south, the prominent coastal Ceanothus becomes Ceanothus megacarpus. It's a really beautiful plant, pretty large, in a different lineage from Papillosis. It's the tougher leaved lineage. It's called megacarpus because it has the largest fruit of all of the species in Ceanothus. There are the capsules left after they've split. They explode to disperse seed. But now you can see the leaves are kind of like cuneatus leaves, pretty thick and tough. You have to go all the way to San Diego County to pick this species up, Ceanothus verrucosus, the white coast ceanothus. This one, if you're not within rock throwing distance of the ocean, you're not going to find it. And it's a very unusual member of the same lineage that Megacarpus and Cuneatus are in, because Megacarpus and Cuneatus and all the other members of those lineages have opposite leaves. So two leaves are found opposite each other at every node. But this one is alternate, and that's a more ancestral character. So it's like this is probably one of the earliest of the species in that particular lineage, and everybody else, except for the coastal megacarpus, is opposite leaved. Very cool to have a relic like that. So it's in a rare and endangered plant that you only find in places like Torrey pines. So if you think about chaparral in the coastal part of California, it's basically, whether you're coastal or inland, it's manzanitas, oaks, chamise, and ceanothus as the dominant genera. And it's just the flavors vary from place to place. Much more chamise as you go interior, not nearly as much as you're on the colder coastal areas. You go to Southern California, what do you know? It's the same. Ceanothus, oaks, chamise, and manzanitas, again, flavors shift from one place to another. Now you have a little more prominence of Ceanothus than you do in Northern California. Otherwise, pretty much you would recognize every place. It's just that the species are changing on you. In Southern California, you find a lot of things like this, a Ceanothus oak-dominated chaparral. In Northern California, I would almost have to draw you a map to get you to a place that would look kind of like this. You go to the edge of the desert, the last bits of chaparral before dropping down into the Mojave. And what do you find? A little bit of chaparral here and there. Chamise, oak, manzanita, ceanothus. So you're getting the same guys everywhere. It's just for the ceanothus, manzanita, and oaks, you're changing species as you go from one place to another. A lot of other genera, though, that I haven't spent much time on. Just want you to be aware, they also have Northern and Southern California variations. So monkey flowers occur in our chaparral in Northern California. This one, Diplicus aurantiacus. It's really a lovely plant. But if you head down to San Diego County, you end up with Diplicus puniceus, another monkey flower, but a bright red to orange instead. And there's about 5 or 6 other shrubby Diplicus that you can find both in Southern California, petering out as you head north. A little variety there. In Northern California, we have chinkapin on the coast, Chrysolepis chrysophylla, and it grows from about San Mateo County north, but it doesn't go south to Southern California. We have a lot of silk tassel in Northern California, and that's the genus Garrya. Our local one is Garrya elliptica. This is kind of a cool plant too, because it has separate male and female individuals. So it's a male on the left in dormant phase, and on the right, that's a female with mature fruit. If you go to Southern California, elliptica begins to disappear and other species begin to take its place that look fairly similar. until you look at the undersides of the leaves and a few other characters of the flowers. Sometimes you'll run into something like this if you go to Central or Southern California. If you get close, you'll see that it's mountain mahogany, Cercocarpus betuloides. This is also in the rose family, but this is in a lineage where in the flower, the style of the flower, the female part of the flower, elongates and creates these huge hairs all over it. And the fruit becomes a dry achene at the base. And that whole fruit is the dispersal mechanism, mostly the style of the uh, original flower. Very cool looking. That's in the coast where there is another Cercocarpus in the high elevation montane forest, but it's not abundant anywhere. You're probably familiar with Yerba Santa, Northern California, a member of the hydrophils. If you go to San Diego County, you've got the same genera, but now you're going to pick up new species. And this one, crassifolium, is still called Yerba Santa, but it has very dense hair on both sides of the leaves. We've talked a lot about chamise, but in Southern California and San Diego County and spottily up to Santa Barbara County, there is a sister species, Adenosoma sparsiifolium, and that's red shanks. And red shanks is very tall, as you can see, but it appears to have a problem. It doesn't produce very many viable seed. So people are worried about this one going extinct. In the poison oak family, we're going to pick up three different species of shrubs that are very major dominants as you move farther and farther south. You'll start picking these guys up in Santa Barbara County. This one is Melasma laurina, the laurel sumac, very deep-rooted, very tolerant to fire, really tall plant, can be 20 feet tall, red, lovely leaves when they're developing. You won't get poison oak from anything like this. A close relative, Rus integrifolia, is the lemonade bush. It produces dormant inflorescences. I think we've talked about that already. Um, and they won't flower till the next year. And when they do flower, they produce fruit that are covered with glands. And if you grab a lot of these glandular fruit and throw them in your mouth, it tastes like lemonade, which is where it gets its name. And you can create a drink by grabbing a lot of fruit and soaking them in water for a while, filtering out the fruit. It has a close relative that you need higher elevation for, and that's Rus ovata, the sugar bush. Very similar. Oh, I point out that person on the trail is a normal size person, so you can see how big the shrub is. Um, very similar in structure, except the leaves are much larger, also has nascent inflorescences. What's really cool about both Rus integrifolia and Rus ovata here is that the juveniles, flowers, have both male and female, but as the flowers mature, individuals sort out into mostly female or mostly male plants. So it's like they're on their way to divvying up the individuals into different sexes. Really cool. A main chaparral plant of Southern California that occurs all the way to the Bay Area, if you know where to look, is Arctostaphylos glauca, the bigberry manzanita. This is a huge plant. It's called bigberry manzanita because it has the largest fruit in Arctostaphylos. That's almost 15 millimeters across. Does that make sense to you guys? That's almost an inch. Just to give you an idea how big these plants get. Sorry, it's a little out of focus, but I wanted you to see the four-wheel drive truck in the lower right-hand corner. That is tall. That's the kind of truck you have to climb into, just to give you an idea of how big these plants can get. Another plant you find only in Southern California and San Diego County is this one, smooth white bark. Nascents on the left-hand side, flowers on the right. So you can see they're very similar to manzanitas. In fact, it's a close relative of manzanitas. It's the Baja bird bush, Ornithostaphylus oppositifolia. If you want to see it in California, you have to go to the border. The border wall is mostly wiped out these plants in California. There's only a few individuals left, but they're pretty abundant in Baja California and within the California floristic province. Really lovely plant, extremely narrow leaves, and notice that the leaves curl around, not like Arctostaphylos or Butis at all. Here's another one that you would find in Southern California near the coast. Again, obviously, probably a relative of an ericaceous plant, and in fact, it is a close relative of Arctostaphylos. This one is summer holly, or Coumarostaphylus diversifolia. But unlike Arctostaphylos, it produces succulent, fleshy red fruit, just like madrones that we have up here in the north. Really lovely fruit. You can kind of see that the leaves are curled over, just like the Ornithostaphylus leaves. That's how they're going to deal with drought. This plant has gray shreddy bark rather than the smooth bark that you might be used to. And I have a leaf picture on the left side so that you can see that the edges of Coumarostaphylus leaves have little teeth. And that's really important because sometimes they're curled so much that you can't really identify them in a vegetative state because they're very similar to another plant in that vegetative state. You can just rub your finger along the edges of the leaf and know that it's Coumarostaphylus and not the next plant we're going to look at, which is the mission manzanita that you find in Southern California. Its bark is smooth. It's kind of orangey, brick orange with white blushes all over it. It has dormant inflorescences like manzanitas that hang down like manzanitas. And that fruit you see there that's black, that is a mature Xylococcus fruit. But it does have extremely lovely flowers. And to tell you the truth, I think the flowers know they're lovely. They have that pink, or yeah, sorry, the yellow lips at the tips of the sepals there. And I think they know they're so pretty because they're blushing pink. I hope that was a good joke for everybody. The fruit come out green and then turn red rather rapidly, but it takes months for them to mature to a black fruit. This is what they look like at the end of summer. This is one of my favorite plants, Neuridium dumosum, the bush rue, and it's a favorite plant because of what happened to me. I was hiking in Chaparral when I first got to San Diego, saw this lovely thing in bloom. I was like, what is this? I've never seen it before. So I collected a little bit of it, came back home, dissected it, keyed it out to Neuridium dumosum, and I was so excited because I wasn't sure how good I was at keying anymore. And then I discovered this. This plant can give you severe phytophotodermatitis from touching the seed, leaf, or stem of this plant. So I had been tearing it apart, doing everything that would induce that. Fortunately, it turns out I'm not allergic. I'm not allergic to poison oak either, so maybe that's part of it. It's in the Rutaceae, the citrus family. It has these glandular punctations. You can see them on the fruit, but if you have a hand lens, you can see them on the leaves as well. Really cool plants. So, you know, the citrus family, when you open up a lime or a lemon or an orange, all of those volatiles come out. It's those glandular punctations are where a lot of volatiles are stored. Really nice plant. All right, getting toward the end here, a lot of other genera that are there that I'm not going to have a chance to really get to, but a lot of salvias, black sages especially. Eriogonum fasciculatum is another prominent plant that you would run into. A lot of succulents occur in Southern California on the coast, like the coastal prickly pear or the chaparral yucca. Another one, Hesperia yucca shadidra, the Mojave yucca, I really like because of the fibers that curl off on the edges of the leaves as they mature. I don't know, there's just something about that that attracts me, kind of artistic. in a bizarre sort of way. A lot of Dudleyias, so many I stopped trying to key them. And there's even a ferrocactus, a barocactus that you can see there that's in the chaparral. Really strange to run into all these cacti. Oops. I thought I'd show you a lovely version of the coastal prickly pear on the left, but also Cylindro opuntia, um, the coastal cholla on the right. So I'm going to end by reminding you that chaparral brings up a love-hate relationship to a lot of people, but for botanists, it's just a love relationship. And that's because they are diverse and gorgeous. They're beautiful. You smell them and they are amazing. So take time to do that. Find a trail. You almost need to find a trail because they're really dense and difficult to walk through. And I think that's why a lot of people dislike chaparral, because this is the common way to get through chaparral if you're not on a trail. You crawl. And that's kind of a difficult thing to motivate a lot of people to do because it gets hot and dry. And even though it's a little cooler if you're crawling around, you have to watch where you step and crawl when you're in chaparral because you can run into unusual things. There is a big animal diversity and system that I haven't gone into, but that's for another lecture. One other thing about chaparral, it burns occasionally, but it is beautiful. And if you find chaparral, it is in gorgeous locations that you want to have photographers come and document. Some of the most beautiful places in California are dominated by chaparral. So don't forget that. So here we are, chaparral, the most Californian of all the vegetation we have, except maybe redwood forest, but they're just redwoods. They're difficult to walk through, but they're beautiful, very diverse, lots of rare species, a lot of variation in the coast from north to south. And it should be of immense conservation concern, not let's get rid of it. So thank you. And I'm happy to answer some questions if anyone's done questions.
Well, thank you, Tom. That was absolutely fascinating. All right, so let's have a look and see what's in the Q&A. So Rosalie is asking, is the fruit of the Xylococcus edible?
So the Xylococcus fruit are like manzanita fruit. They're dry. Um, I I haven't tasted them. Manzanita fruit are kind of sweet usually, but like manzanitas, they have a dry, mealy mesocarp, and the seeds are enclosed in stony endocarp. So you're not going to eat them. You can try to chew the outside off, but now you've made me want to try to taste them. So, and the San Mateo tree lupin is becoming more endangered. Um, if that's the shrubby lupins on the coast, um, there are, if you want it listed as a rare species, just find a lupin specialist to propose it. Where is one? Greg Whalert at the herbarium at UC Santa Barbara would probably be the person to do that. Thank you, Lisa. So Patty asks, what are the drought adaptations in plant vasculature? So the xylem, the vascular tissue that moves water from the roots to the leaves, is basically a tube with dead cells at maturity. And if the adaptations are to have lots of little tubes, and they're much more resilient to water stress, which is a tension in the water column. But to grow faster, they surround uh, those little tubes with big tubes. And the big tubes tend to deteriorate with heavy, severe drought. But the little tubes keep the plant alive. And then when you get new growth of the wood, it creates the large and the small tubes again. So it's mostly changing of the size of the tubes. Conifers mostly have small tubes, which is why you usually find them in tough, uh, droughty places. So
Mm.
otherwise, it's a 45-minute lecture.
Okay, so Sarah is saying beautiful presentation. Is coffee berry included in Chaparral?
Coffee berry is, and I meant to throw it in there. Um, it's prominent but patchily, and there's a few other species if you go to the Sierra. And I haven't run into it in Southern California yet, so I'm not, and I didn't look up to see if there was a local endemic in Southern California.
And then Lynn, can you read Lynn's? This to speak of Native American land uses and adaptations, especially along the northern California coastal chaparral. Can you speak?
Um, so they would collect manzanita berries and fruit of a lot of the plants. They would collect acorns of the shrubs, although they were mostly focused on tree acorns. But they didn't live in chaparral. They lived in coastal scrub and valley areas. They would use fire to keep the coastal scrub down and to clear out the grassland areas. They rarely would try to burn chaparral because it's not in an area they would use normally, and it's not a place that's easy to control unless you've got a steep slope and you start from the top. Um, otherwise, it's a diversity of other uses for basketry and things like that.
Hmm.
Let's see.
Well, let's have a look. Bob, I was once told by a San Francisco State University professor that Adenostema oh, well, maybe you should take that one. Fasciculatum.
Peculate. But it is the most common native plant in chaparral, and as a consequence, probably of California. Um, yeah, I would agree with that. It's not the most common genus, but for a single species, it probably is true. Ooh, what Calicorta species? I have forgotten every name of those that are specific to chaparral, but there are some. Um, there's, in fact, a few federally endangered Calicortus that are in Marin chaparral, in Serpentine, and but most of the others, you've got to go post fire to find them, and I've just forgotten all their names. So let's see, Sarah Burton, one. It would be wonderful if you spoke about the manzanita that you're known for finding and transplanting. Oh, the Franciscan manzanita. So there was one manzanita species that was thought to be extinct, and that was one Alice Eastwood named inside the city of San Francisco called the Franciscan manzanita. But the area that it was found in was a large cemetery area for the most part. But after the 1906 earthquake and the city began to grow, by the 1930s, they decided to move all the cemeteries to Colma and convert that whole area to housing. And basically, Franciscana disappeared until one individual was found in the middle of a freeway leading to the Golden Gate Bridge. And that was in, I think, 2000. No, I'm forgetting the year now, 2007 maybe. And it got transplanted to another part of the Presidio that I'm not permitted to tell you where, but you
Top
can,
secret.
it's in a very public location. So
Mm,
it's not like they've hidden it someplace.
but they just don't talk about it.
Yeah, it was transplanted in January in the middle of a storm in the middle of the night. Richard Graham Bruno. Do I know of any interesting chaparral sites that may have burned in the recent Palisades fire footprint? And that was all housing except for the very top of the ridge. But to either side of Palisades, the Santa Monica's has a really lovely chaparral that has a great post-fire response. The um, Phacelia grandiflora that I mentioned was taller than me was in the Santa Monica's um, in a post-fire site in the 1980s. So, but most of the current fires are urban fires. But don't worry, chaparral will be punished for it. How does coyote bush fit in? Well, it's mostly um, coastal, extreme coastal, and tends to dominate um, areas that are slightly different. And we tend to call it coastal scrub rather than chaparral. But if you burn a chaparral site, a lot of coyote brush will come in and be there for a while. Um, but it tends to get overgrown by other chaparral plants.
Is it a weedy type thing?
I don't think of it as weedy. It's a dominant of northern coastal scrub,
Yeah, very much so.
very much.
Yeah.
In fact, it has invaded my yard in Pacifica, and I've never planted it, and I have like five individuals now. So,
Oh, okay. We had it out front, but we now have it sort of, we've lost it.
Yeah, I don't think it has a long lifespan.
yeah.
Calochorus monophyllus was pictured in an early slide, Sierra mid-elevation.
Yeah, my picture of that plant was in a post-fire site. But there were other Calochortus. I wish I could find my old slides. Trouble is, they're all slides, and
Ah,
I don't have them as digital anymore. So,
so when one travels and views the what is it called? The where we were
Torrey Pines.
Torrey Pines in um, San Diego and the
mhm.
reserve. Is it the usual thing with reserves that they don't interfere or do anything except follow how things progress in terms of plant life, flora, fauna? They don't really interfere with the fact that the plants, the Torrey pines, are having a difficult time surviving.
They haven't done that kind of management. They are trying to restore areas in Torrey Pines State Natural Reserve because it used to have the main highway through it. And then in World War II, it had a military base in part of it. And the southern part is now Torrey Pines Golf Course. So
Yes.
they are doing a lot of restoration. They're keeping people limited to trails. Um, and the part that you can't access on the eastern side of the roads is in pretty good shape. It had a fire 10 or 15 years ago. It's recovering really well. There is a place called Torrey Pines Extension in Del Mar, very similar, and you can see each other from either site. It had a fire this last summer for part of it. So
Mhm.
it's already going to recover if we could get some rain. We haven't had enough rain yet in San Diego. Um, but yeah, it's a highly disturbed system down there, but on the coast. But as you go inland, the chaparral is in pretty good shape.
Mm. Is it possible that the fog there is had contains less moisture than the fog up north?
I don't know. I live really close to the coast, and we had a very foggy summer.
Oh,
Uh,
really?
and if you're not at the elevation where the fog hits the mountains, it's really just the cloud cover that is the main way of reduced water stress and the cold temperatures and the higher humidity. So that's just allowing plants to conserve water. Um, so we don't know. We don't know about fog. The one trend is, at least in central and northern California, that it's um, becoming increasingly less frequent, which is going to be a problem. But if that's a long-term trend, uh,
Yes.
I don't think there's
Yeah.
any kind of trends anymore. I think it's chaos for climate
Well,
now.
it's so everything is so unexpected now. You don't quite know what's around the corner.
Right.
It's just nothing is what it used to be.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, I think let's just have one last look, and I think we're just about done, I think, with questions. How's that? Super.
Excellent.
Yes.
Okay,
So
well, thanks, everybody.
thank you so much. It was
Yeah,
a
thank you.
wonderful presentation and a nice travel from the mountains all the way down to the coast on a nice,
Good.
easy coast ride.
I hope it worked for you then. Good.
So thank you again so much. I'll be
Okay.
in touch. All right.
Bye.
Good night.
Right.
Good night,
Good.
everyone. See you in March. All right. Take care.